We've seen Michigan football terrorize the Big Ten Conference the last couple of years, but I think that their reign of terror over this conference is coming to an end. And for a lot of reasons, man. It's not because I'm hating on Michigan. It's because you lose Jim Harbaugh, who's the greatest head coach that you've ever had. You're probably going to end up getting a statue built of this guy outside of your stadium. All right, I think that in 2024, their lack of elite recruiting is definitely going to hurt them, especially when you look at some of the tough games that they're going to have to play this year against Texas, USC. You got to play Oregon and Ohio State on the road. And those Oregon and Ohio State games, I really don't see Michigan being able to win simply for the fact that Oregon and Ohio State are just way more talented than you. And I don't think it's unrealistic to expect a drop-off from this program when they lose pretty much all their production on offense. They only return one starter on offense from last year. Now, you have a few guys coming back on defense, such as Will Johnson. Your defensive line should still be really good, and your defense should still be elite just because you have Wink Martindale replacing Jesse Minter as your defensive coordinator. Wink Martindale has spent a lot of years being the DC in the NFL. He's highly respected amongst NFL circles, and I expect you to have an NFL caliber defense still with him calling the plays on that side of the football. But offensively, there's a lot of concerns. I get that Michigan, their bread and butter is recruiting and developing offensive linemen, but the offensive line isn't one of those positions where you can just have a bunch of new guys come in and they can just pick up from where you left off last year, because communication and chemistry and experience plays a large factor into offensive lines performing at a high level. When you think of the best offensive lines in college football, something that they always have in common is that you have multiple guys on that end who have played multiple years as starters. And they also have tons of experience. You don't have that this year on the offensive line. Now, you have some guys who've come in and certain spurs, and maybe they started a game or two, but you still are pretty much starting over when it comes to your offensive line. You don't really have a dynamic group of wide receivers. You do have Donovan Edwards at running back, who is going to be a big part of your offense. If not, he's going to be the focal point of your offense. But with the uncertainty at quarterback, with Alex Orji, we don't know how effective he's going to be throwing the football. And you have to be able to throw the ball if you want to be able to win this conference this year. You're not going to be able to win games the same way you did against Penn State last year when you ran the football a million times to close out that game. Alex Orji is going to have to show us that he has the capability to be an effective starting quarterback, and that means him being able to win games with his arm. Regardless of how people feel about J.J. McCarthy, he was consistent and always showed up in the big moments. And there were some Wolverine fans out there that don't even think that Alex Orji is going to last as a starting quarterback this year. There's other guys on the roster who I've seen Michigan fans say should be able to get the opportunity to debunk him as QB1. So there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to Michigan's offense. You only got one starter returning. You don't really recruit that well when it comes to wide receivers. So how dynamic are you going to be in the passing game is going to be determined. And I get that Dan Lanning's defenses haven't been that good, but I expect him to finally have it figured out this year, because this dude is a Kirby Smart disciple. So I'm going to have a hard time picturing Oregon's defense continuing to underperform the way they've had the last couple of years. This should be the best defense that the Ducks have put on the field. And we know how good Ohio State always is from a talent standpoint, but that is a rivalry game, so you can't always judge that based off talent. But you having to go on the road and play them this year with the uncertainty and the mystery that is Alex Orji, I think it's fair to expect Michigan not to be a factor in the Big Ten title picture this year. I think that the Big Ten is going to come down to two teams, that being Oregon and Ohio State. And then even before you play those two games, you can already have two potential losses, because you got to play Texas early this season at home, which gives you a little bit of a slight edge in that game because it is hard to win at Michigan. But Texas, from a talent standpoint, has a more talented team than you. And with all of the new pieces that you're going to be having, a brand new coaching staff. Yeah, Sharon Moore isn't really ideally new, but really he is still going to be learning on the job, because although he was the head coach in replace of Jim Harbaugh when he was serving that suspension last year, Jim Harbaugh was still allowed to coach the team during practice. And it's not like Jim Harbaugh still didn't have somewhat of a say on the strategy and the game planning going into those matchups. Now Jim Harbaugh is gone. It's going to be Sharon Moore's job to run completely with no help from Jim Harbaugh. So I really am not going to be quick to jump on the Sharon Moore is going to be able to sustain the Michigan dominance hype train just yet. He has to show me. And with so much that Michigan loses, you got to remember that Michigan has never been the team that just simply relocks and reloads. You know, they've always been a team that they develop guys and they eventually have guys that are good enough that go into their senior or junior years that end up producing at a high level. I think that this season, you know, it's going to be a little tough for you with how tough the Big Ten is going to be this year. And you've been able to benefit not having to play tough schedules. Last year, you played a pretty weak schedule. The year before that, your schedule was pretty weak. You start this season off hitting the ground running. You're playing Texas early on. USC isn't going to be a pushover. Washington won't just be a pushover. And I do expect you to be able to beat USC and Washington. But Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, I see you being able to lose those games. I see Michigan as a 9-win team this year. Now, the ceiling definitely could be 10, 11 wins. You know, if Sharon Moore ends up being what David Shaw was at Stanford when Jim Harbaugh left that program and ended up becoming a head coach for the 49ers, they were in pretty good shape, and David Shaw was able to sustain what Jim Harbaugh was able to build at Stanford, but eventually that fell apart. So there still is a lot of question marks about Sharon Moore. We've only seen a small sample size as him being a head coach, and it's been with him still having some influence with Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh is gone. This is an entirely new coaching staff. You're going to have a new offensive line that has to develop chemistry. We don't know how good they're going to be at receiver. And you're just not going to be able to grind and pound your way to a Big Ten title if you don't get at least serviceable quarterback play out of Alex Orji or whoever's going to be throwing passes underneath center this year. So I don't expect Michigan to be a factor in the Big Ten title race this year. And I think that's been a big reason why nobody has been talking about Michigan that much, despite the fact that they are coming off winning the national championship last season.